the world's gotten so big and so full of noise, and there's so many choices, such a big digital footprint, that the most important thing now to create value is not actually to add things, it's to subtract stuff.
Welcome to the Games Growth Update. This is one of our interview episodes, which we're excited to bring you this season. We have a interesting interview with John UK of GameTree, who is an interesting entrepreneur and psychologist who's done a bunch of work on matchmaking and a bunch of other things relating to game psychology. Warren, what do you think?
This was a fun episode. John is a fascinating guy. I met him a few months back, was introduced by some mutual friends, had a good initial conversation with him, and I thought he was doing some very interesting work at that cross-section of human psychology and user acquisition that we think about a lot here at Upptic with the work we do. And I thought this was a cool conversation to do, sort of like half super theoretical, super psychological, and half practical of like, okay, cool. Well, what are these player personas and the tech around GameTree? How does this actually provide a better experience to gamers? How is it actionable as either an engagement or user acquisition lever for those of us in growth marketing? We've had a few interesting episodes on this over the years that kind of delve deeper into the psychological aspects of growth marketing and player behavior. And I thought this was really fun for that. Xander, did you learn anything today?
Yeah, I mean, he knows a lot about this topic that I've thought about very nominally. And so I think, whenever we get to do a deep dive, something a little more esoteric compared to a lot of really tactical stuff we really work on, it's always interesting. I think GameTree also is in a little bit of an interesting place right now where they basically built a consumer product. It's starting to scale really aggressively, and they're kind of holding on to get the consumer side going. And they're just at the early stages of building on B2B relationships and B2B products. So I think it was an interesting time for us to talk to them to understand what is the idea and roadmap for how this can be super relevant for game makers and game marketers going forward.
Yeah, they're building, I think, a very compelling proprietary data set based on deep psychological behavior traits and patterns of their user base. They got to be careful with that, but which I think John is very mindful of, just the vibe I get talking to him. But I think there's going to be a lot of powerful ways that can be leveraged, and it's going to be a startup that's very interesting to watch over the coming years.
And if you thought this episode was interesting and you want more similar topics, I'd definitely recommend go and listen to the Solstin episode we did last season. Another very, very similar topic. We go even deeper on theoretical bits of it. And so if you're looking for like sort of a very, very scientifically based episode where we talk about this, check that out. Anyway, enjoy the episode. Welcome, John UK. Very excited to have you here. Let's just jump right in. Can you give us a little bit about your background and what GameTree is and what you do there?
I'm a tech entrepreneur, but also a personality psychology aficionado, and of course a gamer. I've spent many thousands of hours studying personality psychology, especially a scientifically accurate framework called the objective personality system, and I've become friends with a lot of the main researchers around the world. And then through entrepreneurship, I went to Babson College, a university focused primarily on entrepreneurship, and just been doing tech stuff, 34 now, so just all these years in between. GameTree is my main project. I'm one of the co-founders. It's a gamer matching app. Essentially what we do is we capture enormous amounts of user data, personality, tastes, values, gamer DNA, like what's fun for them, and works for hundreds of thousands of games across all platforms, and then finds people highly compatible matches who they not only enjoy playing with, but be real life friends with. And so this data goes really deeply into things that people can do with marketing and a lot of opportunities that I believe are being left on the table, especially in an increasingly data-driven world where everybody can kind of build everything. It's one of the best ways to compete. And then GameTree is now moving towards being more of a general gamer social network. Now that people have built a lot of friendships around the platform, it's about 750,000 signups now and had about 700% organic growth increase in the last 6 months. And I think that this is going to be quite a big year for us.
We're going to get to dig into a lot of our favorite sections of topics today with John. We get to talk about user acquisition, player engagements, player psychology. And John, one thing I think it would be cool to touch on before getting into the heart of GameTree and some of these topics is some of the other work you've done in the psychology field. So you were involved in a project called the 512 Types. Can you tell us a little bit more about your background there and the tie-in from that work, if any, to GameTree?
So personality psychology is a space where most people are interested in learning about themselves, which is one of the most useful kinds of information you can have, is just understanding yourself, how you're navigating the world, what color your glasses are that are tinting your worldview. Most people stop after that. Myself being sort of an engineer-minded person, it's helpful to understand people and how the world works, having more models and logic and stuff. And luckily, many years later, this interest has become relevant in all facets of life, but particularly with algorithms and data, being able to measure a lot of these things and develop algorithms and products around it has become quite useful. The objective personality system is what the 512 types test is built around. These researchers essentially figured out how to apply scientific method for, as far as I can tell, the first time ever to personality psychology in a way where people can have like a framework where people aren't just saying whatever they want about themselves and people aren't just arbitrarily making up a system and saying like, you're this or I'm this, but actually being able to cross-reference from multiple independent data points and then consistently get the same results with each other. So what I did with this test is there's a large community for it now, and obviously having multiple experts independently analyze you is a giant bottleneck. So what the 512 types test does is allow people to self-assess and then compare their data to hundreds of people who are psychoanalyzed and what their actual psychologies are, and then be able to more objectively figure people out. And then now to be able to actually have other people, for example, business partners, friends, relationships, parents, take it on your behalf and then merge your answers to be able to get a more objective view on yourself rather than us just saying whatever we think about ourselves. Because evolution didn't filter for truth and accurately seeing ourselves. It filtered for what benefits us, which is something that becomes more and more and more strikingly obvious the deeper into this topic we go.
I mean, this is fascinating. We draw a line from that to the formation of GameTree, and is there any overlap in the philosophies between these two on paper wildly different pursuits?
So every one of us is more so like an ant or a bee or a termite in a way where we fit into a structured society than just random chaos. We didn't evolve random traits. We actually evolved into archetypes. This has become evident when you look at thousands and thousands of people that have been objectively typed. You start to see really strong patterns in people's like even physical appearances. They look like siblings and twins, for example. Certain features or even just like appearance stuff. It wasn't part of the test, but it's just something you see at scale when you're looking at this. And it's to ensure that all of the work in the tribe gets done. It's better to have specialists who enjoy different things and feel responsible for different kinds of work than a bunch of generalists that might inconsistently, take care of children, not hunt well, build things that fall on us. So when it comes to GameTree, we do have a personality test that we built. It's based on more like Jungian typology traditional, like Myers-Briggs 16 personalities. And then we also have a personal values test and a gamer DNA test. Those aren't like scientifically driven. They're just models like every other test in existence. The 512 types test, and I've spent a lot of time looking at this and years in the space. I've never been able to find anything that's actually scientifically driven. So that will adapt into GameTree. It's not the test being used in GameTree at the moment, but it's still people answering honestly for their own self-benefit, knowing that by providing data, that's a way to really curate their experience and get the most out of something. So the 512 types test is kind of similar to Jungian typology. A lot of the same stuff has been discovered and so many frameworks are showing the same things. People have been rediscovering the wheel because there's something going on in abstract reality, but this test really defines things a lot more clearly and solidifies it. So it's gone from essentially 16 to 32 types that are used in the mainstream to actually 4,096 if you count some new developments and also gender, which is actually one of the coins. It's mostly like, are people more A or B on the spectrum? It's about A or B, A or B. And then when you do like 2 to the 9th power, you get 512. Then it just keeps multiplying from there.
So I think that it would be helpful to sort of quantify this back or tie this back to what GameTree does and then, how is this relevant to gamers? So can you talk a little bit about the types of data GameTree collects and how you guys are using it and what the core premise of the product is?
Yes. So the concept of GameTree is really about curation and personalization. It's one of our fundamental beliefs that the world's gotten so big and so full of noise and there's so many choices, such a big digital footprint, that the most important thing now to create value is not actually to add things, it's to subtract stuff. Because there's already so many games that more important than making a new game is helping somebody find, for example, the best choice for them personally, or for a game to find the right customer or the right early adopters who will leave the best reviews. So we've entered such a massive scale beyond a tribal level that the biggest form of addition is subtraction. And so by gathering all this data, people are matching with other players better, not just random players, but people they're likely to be real life friends with, people they all have compatible play styles with, play a lot of games in common. And then with this kind of data, then you can start personalizing different kinds of segments. For example, you can look at cluster samples of user personas and have an extremely data-driven approach using like hundreds of data points to very, very, very objectively, clearly know things without even necessarily having to like guess or interview people. Then you can also customize, for example, communications. Let's say you have a newsletter that's an important newsletter. Let's say you've been like waiting to do like a really big release or a version 2 or something. you might want to have 2, 3, 5, depending on the size of the sample, different versions of it going out to different groups based on different people's psychological triggers, how they take in information and respond to information. As an example, early adopters are usually people with extroverted intuition. In the Myers-Briggs world, it's basically the ability in a resting state to observe patterns, and they're usually gathering new stuff before referring to old things. And because they gather patterns, they're usually going to see something really early, and they're going to trust it and believe it. So when you look at Web3, for example, like I've personally observed, even though only maybe 20% of the population uses extroverted intuition as one of their main tools, I've observed that the majority of Web3 users have extroverted intuition. It's very, very, very like on a genetic level split. For example, those kinds of users with Web3, being able to talk about visions and possibilities work well, but the majority of the human population doesn't really psychologically respond to that. They want things like excitement, relationships, what's worked in the past, or what are the big companies using. So different segments based on the data you can gather from these sorts of tests will react differently to different calls to action. It could even be used in advertising, for example, where one person might care a lot about competition, another about fellowship, another about the story. So just being able to customize the targeting to people's psychological triggers should see very large multiplied results.
It's so fascinating, John. I'd like to look at this from the very practical growth lever of just thinking of GameTree as an acquisition platform for your clients that are game developers or game publishers. Can you walk us through, we talked a lot about like the player psychology aspect of this, but just from a customer standpoint, if a gaming company is working with GameTree as a potential acquisition platform, what does that user experience look like? What should they expect? And just talk us through the flow from that angle.
Yes, so this is sort of, I think, useful data for anybody to try to collect more of. But on the GameTree side, we're just now getting into the B2B space. There's been a lot of demand, especially from big studios, for a universal sign-in system for the gaming industry. And since we're moving towards being a general gamer social network, kind of like Facebook, then that means that people can transfer their friends, their game lists, their data around the ecosystem to any app or game they want to interact with. So what that looks like is somebody could just implement a super simple just link with GameTree button. It could just be in a settings, it could be on a login page, whatever. And anybody who clicks that, we can then share all the data so that that user can then get a personalized experience on that platform. And the platform instantly gets a huge amount of data about the user. For example, if it's a CD key website, they know which games is on somebody's wish list, or we also have AI for game recommendations that could be curated, or you can use it for player matching, for example. They find people with compatible play styles. You could even use it to be able to use generic like market segmentations and personas for even looking at the data and finding correlations within a game. For example, people that are high on discovery are doing these sorts of actions and other people are using these sorts of actions. This person cares about social status symbols. This person cares more about fellowship. So you might want to give them different kinds of items, for example, ranking how they drop or what kind of experiences people have. It can be extremely, extremely customized. So with this link with GameTree, we're able to then, with the user's permission, share that data with the client. And we're doing this right now completely for free. In the future, we'll be charging for the broader data, like some of the niche edge case stuff, like friends lists and games lists and things like that will be free, but maybe their gamer DNA might be something charged. But since we're just starting this program for early signups, we're giving all this all for free. And then we also, with this data, if people want user acquisition, can come back to GameTree and say, hey, here's all of our users. This is the data of the ones who are our best like users, the ones who play the most, who recommend it the most, the most profitable. Send us more of these guys. And then on GameTree, right now, we're probably getting about 70,000 organic signups this month. We can then target exactly lookalike users, like hugely, hugely targeted, and then send them back to the game, knowing ahead of time that they're going to be really good users. It's also great for early adopters. For example, so many games live and die by their first reviews. And then a last component is the ability to offer curation as a service for matchmaking, community building, or game recommendations. Especially community building, I think, is useful because so many games that have multiplayer components, you really want to build relationships around the game. Besides our health, I think our relationships are the most important thing in the world. Because GameTree has such a strong ability to match people, then if people are building real life friendships around the game or the app, then they're much, much more likely to stick in real life to that thing. For example, if you take a massive multiplayer game, they're usually inferior games to normal games. So if somebody signs up and doesn't find a friend or a guild right away, they're very likely going to bounce. But if you can match them with somebody that becomes their next best friend, then suddenly that game is going to be a big part of their life.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense.